Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today for a nonprofit thought leader episode. And today we have Jeffrey Wilcox, CFRE and CEO of Third Sector Company, joining us from the Pacific Northwest. And Jeffrey is going to share with us how you can survive executive performance reviews. So stay tuned, set aside any distractions that you might have going on, and you make sure that you dial in and focus on today's conversation. We are thrilled to continue these conversations. Julia Patrick is here as the CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. I'm here as well, Jarrett Ransom, your nonprofit nerd, CEO of the Raven Group. And we are so excited to have the continued support and investment from these presenting sponsors. You can see on the screen in front of you, we highly recommend that you check these companies out. If you have not done so yet, we are really thrilled to have, again, their investment, not only in the episode, but truly their partnership throughout the sector at large. So these companies exist to help you do more good, just as our guest is going to help you do more good in and around when it comes to your performance review. So Jeffrey, welcome back.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be with you. I'm among friends.
Yes.
You know, we are always so interested in the things that you have to say, because I feel like with the work that you do across this country, it gives you kind of like us, a different vision of what everybody's doing. And so it's really exciting to get you in at this point in time as we're finishing up the year. It's been another very interesting year filled with challenges and opportunities. And one of those things is going to befall us, and that is the executive performance review. And so we thought, wow, this is a great time to talk about this because it's pretty daunting. And I would imagine a lot of organizations last year said, we've had too much going on, so we're not even going to do it. Let's pile it all on at one point. So we're really interested to hear what you have to say. So right out the gate, what do you mean this isn't a popularity contest?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, the first thing we'll say is, well, I want to like someone. I want someone to like me. Yeah. And well, it's a wonderful quality. The difficulty with being the leader of a not-for-profit organization is you have to make some tough decisions about social problems and issues that are challenging people, families, communities, and our country. Yeah. And you're not always going to make a popular decision in your leadership. And so what happens with a performance review is if we turn it into, well, does everybody like someone? That really challenges the effectiveness of someone respecting someone. And sometimes, an executive director for a not-for-profit organization is constantly earning the respects of a huge, diverse group of people. Corporations, Julia, may have stockholders, but in nonprofits, we have stakeholders. And their investment of sweat equity is as important as a stockholder's investment of financial capital. And any time that we have not engaged someone into our cause and what we do, that becomes a real issue for us. And so we want to have leaders who are naturally catalytic and they are charismatic, but they make tough decisions, and that's not always liked. So let's get the idea about this is not about a popularity. This is about leadership.
So let's back up just a moment, because when you and I first started chatting about this, I immediately went into the financial part. And I saw this as a salary review, benefits review, that whole thing. I saw this with a different lens. And I'm wondering if you could educate me and probably a lot of our viewers as to what the difference between a salary review and a performance review might be.
I'm happy to do that, because let's first of all talk about what a performance review really is. And what it is a demonstration of an organization's commitment to a culture of accountability and excellence in human resources. A culture of accountability and wanting to demonstrate excellence in human resources. Salaries, Julia, is a piece of that, but it's not the entire pie. The accountability is I need you, you need me, we need each other, and ultimately the community needs the impact of that. And so what I often say is an executive performance review is part of an accountability commitment that includes, first of all, evaluating the organization. You have to evaluate the board and you have to evaluate management, because it takes all three in order to thrive in a community. Allow me to say that again. You have to have an effective organization that is led by effective boards, that has an effective leader. And here's the sad part about it. If the only one of that three-legged stool is being evaluated, guess what happens? That one leg is held responsible for holding up the other two, because they were not held accountable for their part of the bargain in serving the community.
I was going to say, back to the popularity contest, I feel, and you really made it so clear, as you always do, Jeffrey, is if you're doing the job of the community and to help provide a solution to the community problem, you're making really difficult decisions, and you probably are rubbing some people the wrong way, but you're really keeping that mission focus and in alignment, which is the number one job of the executive and the board.
Yes. And you know what, Jared, let's change the language. Let's talk about, it's one thing to rate somebody on being popular. How about if we change that word to being purposeful? Because what happens is when someone is purposeful, I may disagree with what they've had to say, but it's very clear that their intentions, their ethics, their behavior was grounded in a commitment to being a purposeful leader. And when we change the language about, am I being purposeful? Am I being methodical? Am I being profound in how I approach difficult problems? You're now going to enter into conversations about no one human being can do that on their own. But a leader helps to facilitate and bring out in others the ability for all of us to be profound, purposeful, transformational. And the result of that is we have a community impact we can all feel ownership in.
Okay, so then given that, what I'm hearing you say is that these should all be done at the same time. If you're going to be doing a performance review, it should be with, your C-suite, your board chair, the board. I mean, is that true, or are we separating these off?
So let's think of an evaluation not as an event. Let's think about it as an accountability system. It is a process that's embedded with how we work. It's part of our culture, which means at a certain given point in time in the year, we all come together and we evaluate our beloved organization. That is the focus of our attention. It's an impersonal look at the systems, the processes, how COVID has impacted us, how our state has done us a favor or done us a disservice, but we get a sense of the state of our organization without any kind of personal comment about what we got there. So Julia, that's the first piece. The second piece is we look at our governance. Is our board absolutely optimal in the community leadership that's stewarding this cause? And then we can say, now let's look at the management piece of this. Without an organizational assessment, how do you have anything to base factually the performance of management on? Because you have no data on how the organization is actually tracking other than your own subjective experience. Yeah. And Julia, I got to tell you, here's where the Achilles heel comes in. You've got people who sit on boards. The total number of hours they've stepped foot in that organization over the course of a year is less than 24. And yet a person's career is hinging on that? Really?
That is scary. Well, let's talk about, so there has been a lot over these last 2 years that have happened. We've talked about, the Great Resignation. We've talked about how some senior leaders were really looking towards a retirement plan, a succession plan. And many of them were like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay with you until the end. We're still, not sure when the end is coming up. When in this process, because I heard you say it's not an event, it's a process, and I appreciate that as well. When do we consider negotiating additional benefits and perks, assuming we are staying and residing in this executive position, when is it the time to do the negotiating?
There's a variety of schools of thoughts on this, Jared, and I'm going to call out that there are varying opinions about this. I'm glad you've asked for mine, and I have seen a lot of these done. And so, first of all, I'm going to tell you, it depends on what state you're in. Because in the state of California, for example, if you're in an organization that meets certain criteria around what they call their Nonprofit Integrity Act, there actually has to be a separate compensation committee. And this was all from as a result of the Enron, which was how are organizations actually providing stewardship to their salary administration. By law, in some states, this has to be two separate processes. It has to be a group of people that are looking at how is your salaries in line with the marketplace. I believe it should be two processes, and I'll tell you why. Because you should be negotiating your additional perks, but the board has a responsibility to have a reserve of dollars in which for negotiation to take place, which means you have to constantly be asking, is this position at market, whether the person has earned it or not? You have a responsibility as a board to begin to have reserves that puts the organization in a negotiating position. I got to tell you, I've seen executive directors not negotiate. I've seen executive directors beg. And the reason why is because the organization has not stepped up and said, we have a salary administration responsibility, which means we have a reserve to pay our people at market. We have a reserve to consider reasonable increases. We have a reserve to do replacement costs, which could include a search firm. We also have the ability to think about sabbaticals, and perks cost money. So if we don't build into our investment portfolio the investment of people, this negotiation becomes a little bit of a bartering system. So here's the short answer to your question. You need to have a good performance review to understand how you've done and how to have an accountable organization. You step back from that and say, as a result of that process, you now move into a negotiation process.
Yeah. And I appreciate you mentioning the different states because there are requirements and regulations that differ between our states. And the California example is a perfect one. Third sector company works across the nation, even into Canada, and maybe further since the last I know. So really having your finger on the pulse. I'm so appreciative of your knowledge, Jeffrey, because that is something that I don't quite think many leaders are really in tune with. And I know now with a lot of our teams working remotely, maybe not the CEO, but it's really about where that person resides, and so while your team previously could have been all local in your community, during the last 2 years, we've found that many of our workforce has taken this opportunity to relocate, which now makes you a multi-state employee regulation, and that changes policies.
And Jarrett, you're hitting on something that I think is the sobriety test for boards. We're talking about executive performance reviews today, but this is really about human resource law. Yeah. We're in the interim executive management business. That's what third sector company does to pay its mortgage. And unfortunately, the vast majority of people who call third sector company have had a bad performance review and are going to leave their position and need an interim. And I can tell you that boards are not completely safe from being bad human resource directors. Yeah. You cannot do a performance review that would break the law. You cannot come after a person for who they are in their personhood. You cannot write things. We sometimes forget as nonprofits that we have a tax status. But that doesn't change the fact that we operate at a state and we are an employer in a state. And whether we're a for-profit or nonprofit, our employees have certain rights that did not end by coming to a not-for-profit organization. And the informality of boards can sometimes think, well, because we're a nonprofit, we can, we can operate a little differently. And I will tell you, courts will not agree with you on that. If there has been mistreatment, harassment, there has been unfair or a wrongful termination, tax status has played very little roles in the determination of courts in those areas.
So then let me ask you this question, because you're bringing up these things that are really important. And in my perspective, and I don't know, Jarrett, what you think, I feel like a lot of boards don't get this. And so in the same place, you're asking that person who's going to be reviewed to also educate their board on what the process is. And that seems to put that CEO really in a bad way. I mean, how do we mitigate what needs to be done? Who's explaining that to the board? And then ultimately that CEO is going to receive that information. It seems kind of wacky, but I don't know how you get around that.
That's such a great question, Julia, because every study that's ever been done has shown that not-for-profits are lagging in the discipline of human resources. It's one of the last professional staff positions that is ever put on the books. Mm-hmm. And so we as board members have to ask ourselves two questions. We have a responsibility when we are recruiting volunteer talent to our boards is, do we have people who have competencies in talent development, talent retention, and talent evaluation? That is such an important commodity when looking at the talents that we're looking for that comprise our boards and our volunteered efforts. And I will tell you, it is well spent money to invest in a human resources consultant for an organization to guarantee both to the board, to the executive, to the staff, and to the community that a fair and equitable review has taken place of the leadership of the organization by an independent third party. It is such a wise investment to look at a potential consultant to help in this area.
I could, and I will tell you, because, full transparency, I've been through the Interim Executive Academy, and as I serve in this placement, HR, Jeffrey, is one of the top topics that comes up of my suggestions during the organizational health assessment, is identifying a lack of expertise in that space. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I know we don't have too much time with you, but I want to ask you if you would be willing to share with us, what are some of the trends that we're seeing currently in the performance review process?
Well, as you talk about what's happened with COVID and what's happened with, we have fewer and fewer performance reviews taking place. So one of the current trends, unfortunately, is not a good trend. I'm going to talk in just a moment to, I think, what is the target of your question. But I got to start with the reality of the question. Is the current trends they're occurring less because of the operating environment we're in. And that's just not good for everybody at all. Now, what are the real trends that are occurring in performance reviews? Organizations are thinking that the old-fashioned 360 that has been done in for-profits for years is not a fair assessment in nonprofits, because in a corporate environment you have protected touch points. In a not-for-profit environment, you have a dynamic touch point. So what's happening is we're doing a lot of performance reviews no longer by tabulation and survey. We're doing it by interview, talking with people. Julia, tell me about your experience working with Jarrett. How did that feel? And it's making more people accountable, because I will tell you that impersonal performance reviews invite passive aggressive behavior. We're hiding behind, we're making accusations and don't have to say anything about it other than write some stuff on a survey and send it in. And that's just not working. So the first trend is a lot more interviews are being conducted to get evaluation. It's not one of talking to everybody. It's talking to a representative group of stakeholders and forming some consensus. Here's the other thing about trends and performance reviews. It is a matter of setting a policy. Boards are now setting policy that says a performance review has to be conducted by X date each year, not when we get around to it. Okay, because some board chairs will do it in June and other board chairs will do it in August. That's not fair. You're seeing a much larger tendency to say we have a policy about when it's going to be done. And number two, we have a policy about how it's going to be done. It's not the current board chair's process they use in their corporation. They bring it over to the nonprofit. It's a representative constituency of diverse people and voices. It's an equitable process, and this is how it's done.
I love that. And I think that that helps with just the administrative aspect and continuity of leadership, because if you're moving through, board leadership at a pretty rapid clip, like so many, organizations do, you're starting all over. And if you can have some of these policies set up, everybody knows what's going to go on. It's an expectation issue for me. You've got to get these things, if you will, calendarized in essence, so that we're all rowing in the same direction.
And you're so right, Julia, because if we go back to the basics of what constitutes a good review, I don't want to leave today's program without, answering that question. I think a good review has the following attributes. Number one, a group of people have agreed on what organizational success looks like. And therefore, we can have a conversation about what board and management success looks like. How can you manage performance or measure performance if there hasn't been, going into the transaction, a joint agreement on what success is? And I'll tell you, Jarrett, the number of boards when I say, could you please tell me what constitutes success for your executive director? That is a Family Feud game where nobody gets the first three answers. That's exactly right. What are the top priorities of your executive director? Yes. And for a lot of board people, it's their priority, therefore should be the executive director's priority. And wow, that's a big change. Now, here's your bonus question from today's game show. An executive director, if there's a board of 20 people, how many bosses does an executive director have?
Yeah.
Now, I got to tell you, there is varying opinions on this. Yeah. But I will tell you, when I counsel on this, there is a difference between your supervisor and your management team. And I have to tell you, the board chair is your supervisor. You cannot have, no employee can have 20 supervisors. Can you imagine in a corporation, Julia, where you walk in and you say, okay, you're a C-suite exec, and guess what? You're going to report to 20 people.
Right.
Would you really take that job?
Yeah.
So we have to ask ourselves, yes, the board is the employer. Now, here's the question. Who's the supervisor? Mm-hmm. Every good employee deserves a good supervisor if you want to be a good employer.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way you phrased that.
Yeah. Otherwise, there's a lot of dotted lines to those 20 individuals. And I'm curious, Jeffrey, because I want to make sure that everyone who is listening to this Thought Leader episode, and maybe some thoughts are coming to mind to say, that's not how we do it. I would love to change how our performance reviews are done. We are using that 360. We did have someone from corporate say, here, this is what we do. Why don't you just do this as well? How might we engage in a different conversation with our board and leadership to start the paradigm change, to shift into a process, not an event, and to really have this equitable process in place as you have described it?
Well, I think that is such a great question, because we have to attack it from three different ways, Jarrett. Number one, I think there has to be a definition of what is the difference between leading a corporation and leading a cause. Mm-hmm. And you want an executive performance that is based on people who are leading causes. Yeah. So we have to agree as leaders. Number one, our executive director, plus me as a board member, plus me as a C-suite person, all of us are here as leaders of causes. And what are the attributes of cause-based leadership versus corporate-based leadership? I don't want to make them mutually exclusive, but I want to tell you they are variations on a theme if this were a piece of music. And number two, we also have to understand what success looks like. Because I think until we understand what success looks like, a 360 is nothing more than a methodology. And if we understand that what we're trying to accomplish as an organization is the following pieces of success, I think we're going to find that a 360 is not probably a fair way than the methodology to see if we actually were successful.
Yeah.
That's the difference between popularity and purposeful.
Yeah, that has been great. And I appreciate the higher level thinking on this, because it seems to me, Jeffrey, a lot of the points that you've raised, they go well beyond the topic of performance review. I mean, they really become a way of thinking about your organization, thinking about management. And it seems to me, if you can get your organization to be kind of changing their mindset, this is going to impact many different parts of the organization. It's pretty substantial.
Point well taken, because we tend to focus on the content of the review, and really what we need to be focusing on is the context of the review.
Yeah.
And we all walk into the boardroom, into the organization with our own context, and that's great, but that's a starting place, not an ending place. And Julia, I want to tell you why this is so important. Because we have a lot of executive directors who've been the victims of bad performance reviews. Our communities have lost these assets. These are men, women, and people who said, I want to get up in the morning and I want to make a difference in the world. And they were put through a process that turned them off and turned them out into the street as unemployed people.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I appreciate talking about this, because when we talk about raising resources for our organizations, raising up great executive directors needs to be among the top of the list, because we can raise a lot of money, but if we're not raising up good leadership, we're not going to leverage that money for the good it's supposed to do for the communities we want to see thrive.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't want to let you go today without talking about third sector's really interesting academy piece. And I don't even know if you've got room, because this is coming up on December 1st. So I should have asked before I put this up together. But I know, Jarrett, this is a program that you went through.
I did. Yes. So I've gone through this one as well as the Board Chairs Academy. So if you are a board member and you are thinking, I have a responsibility in this performance review process, I highly recommend that you check that out as well. But this opportunity that you see before you is exactly where I met Jeffrey. It's exactly how we've become fast nerd friends. And so this introduction to Interim Executive Academy, this new cohort starts on the 1st of December. So Jeffrey, do you have space?
Yes, we do have space. And this actually is just an overview introduction. For anyone who is interested or thinking about, maybe I'd like to be a strategic transitional leader. Now, we use the word interim because that's what everybody uses. But if you're really interested in learning to become a strategic transitional a leader for an organization, we'd love to have you in the Interim Executive Academy, and come find out what it's all about. It's totally free on December the 1st at 9:30 Pacific time.
Good. Yes. Please do check that out. Check out Third Sector Company. Jeffrey, his team, they again work throughout the US and Canada. So much information. These individuals are knowledgeable. They are experienced. I mentioned also the Board Chairs Academy. I highly recommend that, because there cannot be enough education for our boards, and that is so needed around throughout our communities. Jeffrey, you're always a joy to speak with. I always learn from you, and I'm so appreciative that you came on to join us for this episode and to be a thought leader. So thank you.
My pleasure.
It's been amazing, and Jarrett and I are always so grateful for the different perspective you bring to what is really going to take our nonprofits to the next level. And so it's so critical. And I think, Jarrett, knowing you and having gone through your trainings, it speaks volumes. And so we're really, really privileged that you are in our orbit, as we like to say. Also in our orbit are all of our sponsors, and we are incredibly grateful for them, because they allow us to have these amazing discussions day in and day out. We're well past our 400th episode as we finish up the year. And so it's pretty ding dang exciting for all of us here. Don't you think, Jarrett?
Very exciting. Yes. And as Jeffrey said, I remember when. So a lot has changed, and we are moving forward into the new year as well. So grateful to have you on again, Jeffrey. Thank you, because you have been a staple of knowledge throughout our last 400 plus episodes. Highly recommend everyone check out Third Sector Company and Jeffrey and his team. Phenomenal. I hope that everyone will join us here tomorrow. And the way we end every episode, and we mean it, is we ask you to please stay well so you can do well. Thanks everyone for joining us. And thank you, Jeffrey.